In this part, we're going to see the case histories from UCLA. First person is Olivia, a middle-aged homemaker, developed an obsession soon after the 1994 Los Angeles earthquake that the water in her washing machine was contaminated. She even imagined that water from the toilet was somehow pouring into the washer. So that's Olivia. Next person is Lisa. Lisa, an x-ray technician, developed an irrational fear of lead. Because she worked around lead, it became a terrible problem. First, she imagined that her hands were contaminated, then her shoes, then everywhere that she had stepped, and began to designate clean zones in her home. She would warn people that she worked around lead so they could get away from her. Washing became a time-consuming compulsion. The next person is Lynn. An attractive college student, became obsessed with picking at her face, trying to get rid of imaginary flaws. She had a condition called body dysmorphic disorder, which may be related to OCD. Ultimately, she had to lower all the lights in her apartment and tape sheets of paper over the mirrors. A similar disorder, trichotillomania, or compulsive hair pulling, may also be related to OCD. The next case history we have is Karen. Karen, far more typical, is the case of Karen, a homemaker and former dental assistant in her early 50s. Karen is a hoarder. Her problem began as a harmless hobby early in her marriage, when she and her husband Rob would hunt yard sales for inexpensive treasures for their new home. Before long, Karen was bringing home useless curbside cast-offs. In time, every room in their house was crammed so full of junk that it was impossible to open the doors. Even the bathtub became a dumping ground for this rubbish. So much stuff was heaped on the stove that only a single burner was usable. Only a narrow path was navigable through the living room. Between trash bags and box stuffs to overflowing, with their 16 cats and 4 dogs, sometimes reliving themselves behind those pails of trash. The stench became gagging. Karen recalls, "We were too embarrassed to invite anyone in. There was no heat in the house because they were afraid that they would start a fire if they lit the pilot on the floor furnace. Throughout the house, there were only 2 suitable chairs. Appliances would break down, but Karen and Rob couldn't get them fixed because they were terrified that a repairman might report them to the health department. They shuttered the bottoms of their windows and let the shrubs grow so no one could peek inside. Rob had lived with this mess for so long that he no longer viewed the situation as wildly bizarre. Our home was no longer a refuge," Karen said. "It had become a prison. We were foundering like a sailing ship that is depending on winds that don't come." For them, help came inadvertently from one of Karen's former colleagues who dropped by unexpectedly. Karen was so humiliated she gave up yard sales cold turkey, only to begin hunting book sales. Now Rob had to build library stacks to house all the books she brought home. Still, Karen did not seek help, fearing that she'd be committed to a psychiatric hospital. Finally, in desperation, she saw a psychiatrist who suggested that she just set up a dumper in the driveway and purge the house. Karen wasn't about to do that. "I could just see myself running out into the yard, screaming and throwing myself on the dumpster, and being forcibly removed to a psychiatric hospital, all in full view of my neighbors." Finally, after 10 years of hoarding, she joined Obsessive Compulsive Anonymous, a 12-step program based on Alcoholics Anonymous. There she met someone who persuaded her to begin the long, hard process of cleaning out that would take years. "My big mistake," Karen said, "was that I thought I had to fix my problem myself. I had false pride. I did not want anyone to see my shame." At UCLA, we taught Karen the 4 steps, which she keeps pasted on her bathroom mirror and consciously invokes whenever she spots a tempting yard sale or an attractive item poking from a trash can. When Karen relabels an obsession and says to herself, "Let it go," she means letting go of both the obsessive thought and the fleeting wish to hang another piece of junk. "If I make the right choice," she says, "I get to feel good about myself. I get to be that much closer to a rubbish-free, hassle-free environment. I get to be healthy. I get to have friends. I get to have a life." One technique she uses is to get angry at all that stuff and how it's wrecked her life. "I don't just toss things into garbage cans. I throw them in with a vengeance, as if to kill them, as if our lives depended on it." And in a deep sense, they do. So that was Karen's case history. Now we're going to look at blame it on your genes. In telling her story, Karen mentions that she grew up in a rigid perfectionist household with an eccentric father who would rant constantly against waste. She wonders if this experience mandated the content of her OCD, which is possible, especially since as yet there is no biological explanation as to why one person washes while another hoards. Other patients also reflect on their childhood and their genetic legacies in attempting to find answers to why they developed OCD. Certainly, genetics does seem to play a role. Again and again, patients have told me of mothers or sisters or grandparents who certainly had OCD tendencies, long before the disease was given a label. Formal studies show the same thing. OCD tends to run in families. Frequently, parents of people with OCD were rigid and inflexible and became very uncomfortable if things weren't done in a certain way. For example, at 5 on the dot each day, Howard Hugo's grandparents went out on the porch of their summer house. As a child, Howard had to be there precisely at 5, or there was hell to pay. One could think of this kind of rigidity as a low-grade OCD. These traits can be highly advantageous if you are, say, a surgeon or an accountant, but they can become pathological if they are amplified. Thus, it's not surprising to see that a precursor of an OCD biochemical imbalance in this much less disruptive habit-based brain function. Child-onset illnesses have also been linked to OCD. Dr. Suzanne Suedo's group at the National Institute of Health has established a link between OCD and Sydenham's chorea, a variant of rheumatic fever that involves an autoimmune attack on the brain. Her work implicated Sydenham's chorea in both the onset and exacerbation of OCD. The fact that there is a strong relationship between Tourette's syndrome, a motor tic disease, and OCD is also intriguing. The link between childhood psychological experiences, especially traumatic ones, and classic OCD is less clear, but some of my patients are convinced there is one. Michael, a stenographer, feels strongly that OCD stems from growing up in a household with a father who would dwell for days on minute and the mother he describes as an anal retentive, compulsive cleaner. He recalled my mother tending to be very over-possessive, but though she smothered me, she didn't nourish me in other ways, which is the same thing my OCD does. You having all the potential that is smothered. I remember other kids taking piano lessons, whatever, but she never allowed me to do those things. She did the smothering. With OCD, you might have the potential, but it smothers you and does not allow you to get out. Michael describes himself as having a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde brain, with a good side and a bad side. The OCD side, he had counting and touching compulsions about good numbers and bad numbers, and compulsions to repeat sentences over and over again in his head. But his most bizarre compulsion, one with which he still struggles, began in 5th grade. I would be sitting in class and suddenly I would feel my pants were too tight. He was unhappy in school, partly because of his OCD made it difficult for him to concentrate, and he now wonders if this feeling of creeping pants was some sort of subconscious distraction technique. Although Michael has overcome most of his other obsessions, he says his OCD seems determined to dig in for all it's worth and win the final battle. The battle of the too tight pants, or as Michael somewhat inelegantly puts it, the fear that my jockey shorts are going up my butt and are going to come through my mouth. They're shrinking so much. Before behavior therapy, he would sometimes shed his clothes in an attempt to shed the feeling. Now he realizes that giving into the ridiculous thought is the worst thing he could do. Michael finally overcame his obsession about pesticide contamination, an obsession so severe that just seeing a can of Raid at the supermarket traumatized him. If I'd put my things down for the cashier and somebody ahead of me had a can of Raid, I'd have to take all my food and everything and put it back in the shelves and restock my basket. I thought everything had been contaminated. Of course, I'd have to go to a different checker because I didn't know if the conveyor belt was contaminated. Sometimes I would take so long that I would just have to forget about getting food. If Michael saw an exterminator's truck on the road, he would have to go home, wash his clothes, and shower. Always, he says, I felt like this shroud of poison was kind of draped over me. The moment of truth came when he was informed that the apartment house where he had been living had been sold and the building was to be tented for termite treatment. Michael panicked. Should I protest at City Hall, get a psychiatrist's note saying that the exterminators couldn't be allowed in because he was mentally ill? Then he got a hold of himself. I thought, wait a minute, just let them do it, because maybe I'll get better. I had resolved that this had to be done, and I wasn't going to die. This was a really big thing for me. One moment of clarity after 20 years of suffering from this obsession. The work of using mindful awareness to know what obsessions really are began to pay off for him in a big way. Michael then went one step further. When the exterminator came, Michael asked him for his business card. He took to carrying the card around as a reminder that he wasn't going to die, by purposefully exposing himself to what once had terrified him. He knew he was making himself better. Through practicing the 4 steps, Michael had learned to think of OCD as this bad guy in my brain that can't fool me anymore. I know I'm not going to die from pesticides. I know I can touch a table twice without touching it a 3rd time, and nothing disastrous is going to happen. But those creeping pants still nag at him. That's part of my body. They're on my skin. They're all the time something I can't escape. Although Michael still has a modest amount of residual OCD, he's well aware of the tremendous amount of improvement he's made and of how much he has increased his ability to function. In the battle against OCD, he had learned, you just do anything you can to sabotage yourself. It takes incredible drive, total effort to resist it. It's just intense pain, as bad as any physical pain. He has learned too that robot-like performance of the 4 steps without mindful awareness does not work. This is Michael's description of himself, locked in combat with his OCD, practicing self-directed exposure therapy. You're thinking, well, if I touch this, my father is going to die. But I'm going to do it anyway. So you touch it and you still feel your father is going to die. You just have to say to yourself, okay, whatever happens, it's better than living this life. Just do the 4 steps and keep the faith. What a deep insight that is. Today, Michael says he's down in the dirt with my OCD. The smart money won't bet against someone who can fight like that. At UCLA, we have many case histories of OCD-related contamination fears. In the case of Jack, a temporary worker, actual physical pain was the impetus for him to seek help for his compulsive hand washing. He couldn't face another winter with red, raw, cracked hands. He washed his hands so much that his young daughter called them his soap popsicles, icy cold with the smell of embedded soap that he could never quite wash away. In treatment, he learned that when he refuses to give in to the urges to wash his hands, nothing catastrophic happens. I know if I don't do it, that it's not going to be the end of the world. Before, he always felt as though catastrophe was just around the corner. My safe place, my car, my home were all going to be invaded if I didn't do those compulsions. It is not vital that Jack and other patients successfully relabel every time an urge to do compulsion arises. But if they give in and perform the compulsion, it is vital that they recognize mindfully that it is a compulsion and that this time they were unable to resist it. This is much more useful than relabeling it in an offhanded automatic manner. When you relabel automatically, it becomes a ritual in itself and has no meaning. There is nothing magical about saying to yourself, "Oh, that's an obsession." Following a doctor's orders in that fashion mechanically without thinking about what you're doing is not helpful. Mindful awareness is. So you say, the feeling is to see if I lock the door. Then when you check the door and do it carefully with mindful awareness, so you'll be ready to fend off the urge next time, you say, let me just make sure the door is locked. That's a sure prescription for endless compulsive checking. So now we're gonna look at assertive relabeling. Assertive relabeling. At UCLA, patients were asked to write essays in which they describe their symptoms and how they respond to them. Another type of self-directed therapy. These essays have provided us with an extraordinary library of knowledge on OCD. Since OCD patients tend to be bright, creative people, their ways of expressing what they go through in battling their disease make for fascinating reading. Joanne, who suffered for years from a small voice in her head, repeating negative thoughts over and over like a broken record, told of seeking a cure in a self-help book. The author suggested she snapped a rubber band on her wrist as a distraction technique whenever her mind started playing its OCD tricks. Joanne wrote, "All I got was a sore wrist the first day. What eventually made her better was not a rubber band, but the 4 steps. She first began to feel that she had some control over her life when she told herself, if I don't want to get hit by a train, the negative obsessive thoughts, I have to get off the track and let the train go by." She was applying a technique we call working around her OCD. Today, with the help of behavioral therapy and medication, Joanne is able to say, "The sun shines on my soul." Mark, a young artist, described a true-life OCD experience that reads like a pilot for a horror film. His OCD started in childhood with prayer rituals, and by his early 20s had shifted focus to a cleaning compulsion. He would have to clean his apartment 12 times, then find some girl and have sex in order to cosmically sort of switch the energies back the right way, so a member of his family would not die. Using a woman in that way made him feel bad, so he would clean one more time as a sort of purification ritual. Then one day, after the 13th cleaning of his apartment, he was walking down the street and a pigeon literally dropped out of the sky dead at my feet, with blood gurgling out of its beak. Clearly, this was an evil omen. 13 was a bad number. He had to clean a few more times. Having done so, Mark went to a coffee shop for lunch. But as luck would have it, the man in the next booth was reading a newspaper with the headline, "Where Pigeons Go to Die." Okay, he thought, let's clean some more. Finally, after he had cleaned his apartment 21 times, he was able to rest easy. For a time, Mark thought he could fool his OCD by turning tables on it, saying if he did his compulsions, a family member would die. I thought, okay, Mr. Smarty Pants, I've solved this thing. There you go. It did not work. New compulsions took over. I hadn't learned my lesson, which is that you can't use the shortcut and get to the finish line. It doesn't work. It always backfires. It would be years before he would rid himself of his cleaning compulsion. There was actually one time I had to clean my apartment 144 times. It took months. For Mark, the breakthrough during behavioral therapy came when he found an apartment he wanted, but was warned by his inner OCD voice, no, you shouldn't move in there. The numbers in the address were not good numbers. Mark took a stand. Damn it, I can't believe I'm going to let a choice in my life that is major be dictated by OCD. This is assertive relabeling. Right after Mark moved in, his thoughts about bad numbers went away. He told himself, as he always does now when OCD thoughts intrude, I don't have to do it. I don't have to do anything about it.